We finally have the details here on Ballmer's long-rumored restructuring here. Any surprises to you?
No, not really. I mean, this is more or less what we talked about earlier in the week, and as I think there was a Dina Bass had a story on Bloomberg late last week sort of tipping off most of the structural changes. So, what we've ended up with is, this kind of rationalization of this kind of Game of Thrones structure, I keep calling it, that Microsoft had in the past, where all these warring fiefdoms of product families at the company were rationalized down to 4, and a little bit of restructuring in the non-product groups, but the whole idea was this kind of simplification. So, quite honestly, I don't think too much is a surprise here. But the only thing that kind of baffled me a little bit was if you read through the release, partway through, Steve Ballmer concedes that all of this may change because he hasn't actually talked about it with everybody who's going to be involved in this, which I found a really remarkable statement at this stage in what was supposed to be a pretty widespread re-engineering.
Paul, one of the questions that we raised earlier with John Ehrlichman, who's out in Sun Valley, seeing many of the media executives who have an interest in what's going on at Microsoft, is whether this is going to quiet, any of the calls for Steve Ballmer himself to be reorganized out of a job.
Right, sort of the head of all the great families. I think that's part of the reason why, in a reverse sense, it's part of the reason why the stock is up this morning. It's not because this is a particularly, revelatory move. This is exactly what people expected. As a matter of fact, it's a kind of a move to an older style Microsoft structure. I think many investors see this as a kind of, closing hurrah in the Ballmer era at Microsoft, where, he's transitioning to devices and services. He's elevating Julie Larson-Green, who many see as his sort of successor in terms of running the company, and there's other candidates, but that's one of them, and that maybe this is one of the last things we're going to see from Ballmer, and he's putting in place the pieces for his eventual exit. I'm closer to that view of things. I think this is one of the last major moves from Ballmer, and that's part of the reason. If you want to be optimistic about the company, that's one of the reasons to be optimistic, not because this reorg suddenly makes them lean, mean, and competitive.
Well, let's talk about what it means for the strategy and for Microsoft's future amid a changing technology landscape. We were just talking about how PC sales had a 5th straight quarter of declines, right. A record losing streak for them. How does this set up Microsoft to tap into mobile computing, where the future is?
So, the idea behind all of this is this one Microsoft notion, which always makes me think I should be singing a U2 song at this point. But anyways, the one Microsoft idea, which is this idea of sort of don't make me sing, devices and services. And so, the devices is really getting around the idea of the company being PC-centric and saying it's whatever the consumer consumes Windows and related applications on, which is increasingly phones. So that's their play on mobile. And then on the flip side, they're recognizing that the other major thrust here is on services, which are all the cloud-based services that they, like everyone else, recognize as really the future of information technology. So the intent here is to make them less visibly reliant on Windows as a PC platform and more reliant on Windows as an enabler of cloud services on the one hand and mobile on the other. And that's the right thing to do. It's just not obvious that they've got enough traction in either to warrant a lot of excitement about it.
Paul, we've known about this shakeup for about 6 weeks. And right. Perhaps the leak, if that's what it was, came a little early because Don Mattrick ended up leaving the company to go to Zynga before he could be installed in a new position. What's the value of floating that trial balloon? Why doesn't Steve Ballmer just do what feels right and announce the shakeup and let the world react?
I think this was partly for shareholders. This was partly to say, because, Ballmer's been under a lot of pressure to come up with both a structure and a strategy that really gets people excited. So either turn it into a true growth story or turn it into a true dividend cash flow story. But straddling both of them and hoping that somehow satisfies investors was always a loser strategy. So I think floating this and saying, we're going back to a more functional structure. We're taking all these presidents of all these divisions, turning them into executive vice presidents, rationalizing it all and focusing truly on devices and services. How about this, investors? Are you excited? And, judging by the recent share price performance, people like the idea that it's the right emphasis. So, in that sense, I think it kind of played out. As I said, though, the disappointing thing is, despite having had all this time and despite this trial balloon, it's clear from the release that this has not been widely discussed at the highest levels of the company. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see some more departures before all of this shakes out before the end of the year.